Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to talk about sliders. Sliders as a GUI control is useful in cases where you want to impose a limit, a minimum and a maximum values between what a user can give as an input. So for example, it is useful in many cases in your settings page. For example, your music volume setting. It is also helpful in your character creation page or anywhere in which you want to restrict user input in place of any arbitrary input. To add a new slider in your scene, you can right click inside your hierarchy window, go to the UI tab and then click on slider. Inside the new slider game object, you can see some familiar components like the rect transform and the transition subcomponent. And if you want to know more about the rect transform or the transition component, you can check those videos in this series. Now, one thing you should note here is that slider is a type of compound GUI control. By that I mean is that slider is not a single game object with a single game component called slider, but rather it is a collection of smaller GUI controls which together in conjugation create a single compound GUI control. I will go into the play mode and show you how these smaller components work together to create the whole GUI control which is called the slider. So we'll focus on the slider in the scene view and then go into the play mode and interact with the slider, and then we'll see how the individual components behave when we interact with the slider. I will change the color of the fill a little bit so that the change is more visible. Now when I go into the play mode and interact with my slider, you can see a couple of things. The first thing to note here is the handle game object, which has a image component, and the handle denotes this circular sprite. And if you want to change the visual look of your handle, you just have to replace the source image inside this image component. And the second important thing is the red color that you can see being filled up to the point where my handle is, and it denotes how much amount you have slided your slider. And this is controlled using the second component, which is the fill game object, which has a image component. And if you want to change the look of your fill area, which is in this case the just a simple sprite with a red color, you can change it by changing the source image of the fill game object. And the fill area, the parent of my fill game object, represents the area in which the fill image moves. Now both of these game objects, the fill and the handle, are both controlled by the slider component. The slider automatically finds the correct position of your handle, automatically expands your fill image so that the sliders look exactly how it is supposed to be based on the slider value. So if I have filled the slider up to its maximum value, for example the maximum value is 1, from the slider is from 0 to 1. If I have moved my handle to the max value, the slider component which is attached to the topmost game object will automatically adjust the handle game object and its image component, and also the fill game object and its image component. So the slider has a reference to the fill rect transform, and it has a reference to the handle rect transform. And since Unity automatically does this resizing or repositioning, you never ever have to worry about these two things. Now the third thing inside my slider component is the direction. Here you have the four option of what type of movement you want in your slider. So it can be either left to right, I can change it to right to left. In this case my 0 is the rightmost position, and when I move the slider to the leftmost position, it will give me the maximum value. Similarly, you can change it to bottom to top or top to bottom. The next two options are the minimum value and the maximum value. They denote what actual value your slider represents when it's lies between those two extremes of your slider. So if my minimum value is suppose say 5 and my slider is now resting at its leftmost value, then this slider will denote the value to be of the minimum value, which can be 5 or 0 or anything you want. If the slider is in middle, it will represent a value that is exactly between the minimum value and the maximum value. So you are free to set any minimum value and any maximum value. The next option is to make your slider accept just whole numbers, which means your slider will only move in steps to the next whole number. It can only move from 0 to 1 to 2 and no number in betweens. So I will just show you a simple example. Suppose my maximum value is 5 and I have clicked on the whole number. In this case, as I move my slider, it will move in steps to the next whole number. And if I have not checked my whole number checkbox, my slider can move smoothly between any two given number. The next field is the value, which is nothing but the actual float value of your slider determined by your minimum value, your maximum value, and the position of your slider. And the last field inside the slider component is the on value changed event. And just like as you have seen in my button video, this is an event where you can hook up your functions, where you can subscribe to this event with your own functions, and then your function will be notified of any slider change, and in this case you will also be provided with the new slider value if if you have hooked your function with this event. So now I will go inside the code and get the slider value by hooking my function to this on value changed event. Since the delegate of the on value changed event is of the type that it accepts a single float as an argument, we'll have to create a function which takes a single float as an argument. So I will create a simple public void get slider value, which takes a single float as an input. And let's just debug our slider value to see if this is working. The right. Now just like we did in my buttons video, you can hook your function to this slider by going on the on value changed event, clicking on the plus button and then dragging the game object on which your script lies, and then choosing our script, and then choosing which the function that we want to attach to this event. Now in the case of slider, Unity will automatically try to recognize the functions which are uh, eligible to be hooked to this function. So in our script we only have a single function which takes a single float as an argument, so it will categorize those types of function in a separate category than the rest of the functions and fields. So we can see that our new function get slider value is placed on the top, so it is easy to choose. Now this now our function is hooked, and we can check by going into the play mode, and let's look at our console. So every time when I change my slider to a new value, it will give me a debug message, and it will also show me the value of the slider. Now the min and max value of my slider was 0 and 1. So when it is roughly in the middle, I was getting the value 0.45. Let's change my min and max value and let's see if we can get different values. So now when the slider is in middle, we are getting the values as 20. Let's move it somewhere here, and we are getting around 17.7. Right. Now just for testing purpose, I will change the slider input type to whole numbers. so the value changes in steps. So the range lies between 0 and 20. Right now it's not a whole number, so we can move the slider freely. Now I will go and change it to whole numbers. Now the value always changes in steps, so 17, 18 and 20. This linkage between the function and the slider in order to get the value of a slider in your code can be achieved directly inside the code too. So I will very quickly show you how this linkage can be done. First we include the Unity engine.ui namespace, create a new public slider variable and assign it to the slider whose value we want to get in our code. And the linkage is created using slider dot its on value changed event, and we can add the listener using the add listener function and provide it with our function get slider value. Now if we go into the play mode, we can expect the same result as we have done when we were doing the direct linkage using the inspector. So as I move my slider from the min to the max, you're seeing the information is conveyed in my code and the value is debugged using the function. Now one last important thing to know about sliders is that you can directly change the value of a slider from your code, and this can be achieved by using slider.value, and then you can assign any value that you want for your sliders. If your value lies outside of the min and max value set from your inspector, it will be clamped between those min and max values. So let's give it a value of 15, which is between our min max range of 10 and 20. And now when we go into the play mode, we'll see that the slider starts at the value of 15. You can also note that even when we are setting the value from our code, for example, if you want to give a initial value to our sliders, this event, the event of on value change, is still called even when we are changing the value of a slider from our code. So there was no user interaction directly with the slider, but since we changed the value of the slider, this event was called. Now a more important feature is to use slider dot normalized value. In this case, the your provided value will lie between 0 and 1, 0 being the minimum value and 1 being the maximum value. This is a little bit better than directly changing the value, because in the case of changing the normalized value, you are sure that this will lie between 0 and 1 and you don't have to know about the min and the max values. So you have the option of using either the value or the normalized value.